Hello everybody, so today I wanted to be showing you a Twisting Blades Deathtrap rogue build that I have been playing. I'm going to have a link in the description to Maxroll's build guide. They do a pretty good job of describing this build. I didn't come up with this build. I'm just showing it to you guys because I've been playing it. I thought it was pretty cool. So if you guys haven't seen this build yet, you might like it. So first off, we go cheats aspect. So you take 24% less damage from crowd controlled enemies. Whenever a crowd controlled enemy deals direct damage to you, you get movement speed. So it's honestly, you pretty much just have 25% damage reduction because you can crowd control enemies very easily on the rogue. Or we'll at least put some type of crowd control on them, like whether it be a slow, a knockdown, etc. Right? Next up, we have Aspect of Disobedience. This is going to give you a nice stacking armor buff. And we have Aspect Retribution. This is probably the main thing I disagree with. Is I'm not 100% convinced that this is very good to run because this is a melee build. So yes, it does give distant enemies a chance to be stunned. So it's like a form of CCing them. But I'm gonna have to look into doing into some more rogue stuff because I feel like there might be some better options than Aspect of Retribution that you can get a little bit more value out of. Then you have Aspect of Might, so basic skills grant you 20% damage reduction for 2 seconds. Then we have Ravager's Aspect, so this gives your Shadow Step a second charge, and this is your main way to break CC chains, so it gives you pretty much 2 get out of jail free cards for CC chains. Pretty good. The rest of this doesn't really matter. I think the main reason why you do this is simply to be able to do another Shadow Step to get out of CC chains. Next up we have the Blade Dancer's Aspect. So this is the Twisting Blades portion of it, and what this does is it makes it to where after you cast Twisting Blades, whenever they return to you, they orbit and they do a bunch of damage. To be quite frank with you, I don't really understand why Twisting Blades does so much damage. Like, I'm still trying to figure that out, but it does do a ton of damage. So yeah, Twisting Blades is kind of nuts right now. But on paper it does not look like it should be doing as much damage as what it does do. It's pretty crazy. So on the necklace, you're going to go Edgemaster's Aspect, so skills deal up to 27% increased damage based on your variable or primary resource. The reason why we put this on here is because we're going to go Inner Sight, so there's going to be times when we just have, you know, free resource, so that means we're just getting 30% extra damage on our skills that we're casting for free. Then we're going to go Aspect of the Umbral, so whenever you crowd control an enemy, you're going to get resource back. And then we are going to go Accelerating Aspect. So critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed by 23%. This is a Barber build. You're going to go Barber, Dark Dance, and then Revenge. So Revenge gives you damage reduction. Dark Dance gives you a way of not spending energy, which helps with your Edge Masters. And whenever you do spend it with life, it does deal 19% up to 28% increased damage depending on how good of a rolled one you find. And then the Barber has just become the best Malignant Heart. You want this to be 4 seconds optimally because you want to pack as much damage as you can into it. But it's fine. It doesn't really matter how long it goes. This is going to be the best heart for you pretty much no matter what, I think, across all builds now. So before Rogue's Lucky Hits were not going into the Barber. That's been fixed. So, or well, I don't know if it wasn't going in, but they just weren't going off, period, I think, or something like that with the Barber. But that's been fixed. So now this has just kind of become the best heart, I think, for probably almost every build in the game, if I'm being completely honest with you. Any build that can run this, I think the Barber is going to be the best. When it comes to stats, you want crowd control duration, cooldown reduction, max life, and percent total armor on the helm. You're going to want percent total armor, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, damage reduction, and then max life. You really just want some form of 4 defensive stats on here, I would say. And then gloves, you're going to want ranks of Twisting Blades, critical strike chance, attack speed, and then lucky hit chance to slow, just so you can have, more crowd control. And then here, same thing, you're going to want damage reduction, reason of poison, max life, total armor, and then damage reduction. And then on the boots, you're going to want movement speed after killing an elite, damage reduction while injured, and then energy cost reduction. On the bow, you're going to want critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, dexterity, or all stats, and then damage to close enemies. On the necklace, you are going to want, I guess this is the way I like to run. I like to go cooldown, damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned, energy cost reduction, and then ranks into weapon mastery. I think some other build guides and stuff like that will suggest slightly different things, but I'm a pretty big fan of having another damage reduction stat on the necklace. Next up, for the rings, you're just going to want crit, vuln, critical strike chance, critical strike chance, critical strike damage, vuln, and max life on both your rings. And then on your weapons, you're going to want critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, damage to close enemies, and then dexterity or all stats on both of your swords. You want to make sure that you go a crossbow so you can get extra vulnerable damage, and then you want to make sure that you go swords because you get extra critical strike damage, right? So those are going to be the best things. Also, when it comes to these two aspects, I actually don't think I went over these. You have using an agility skill reduces the cooldown of your next subterfuge skill by 20%. Using a subterfuge skill increases the damage of your next agility skill by 20%. So your poison trap is a subterfuge skill, so it'll kind of help trigger these back and forth. But I think the main reason why we do this is so after using an agility skill, it'll reduce the cooldown of your next poison trap by 20%. So. And then here we have dealing direct damage to enemies affected by your trap skills. Has up to a 39% chance to make them vulnerable for 3 seconds. There's another way to make them vulnerable. Inner sight here is what we're going to go. You could go combo points, but personally I like inner sight. I think inner sight's super sweet. When it comes to the skill tree is actually really straightforward. That's something I realized after kind of observing rogue builds, is most of their builds is very straightforward. So where you go puncture, enhanced puncture, primary puncture. This just gives you a ton of access to vulnerable, which is super nice. Then we have twisting blades. This is going to be your main source of damage. It just does an absolute ton of damage. So twisting blades deals 30% increased damage when returning. And then enemies are dazed while impaled with twisting blades. This gives you just another way to CC things. You can get your damage reduction, etc., stuff like that. And then you want to go sturdy and siphoning strikes. This gives you some healing on your crits against close enemies, and then close damage reduction. Then you're going to want to go shadow step, enhanced shadow step, and disciplined shadow step. So shadow step's cooldown is reduced by 3 seconds when it damages an enemy you have not hit with shadow step. So as long as you're shadow stepping to different things, it's going to reduce the cooldown of this by 3 seconds, which is pretty big because that means your shadow steps are really only going to have a 5-second cooldown. If you're using it on various enemies, and because you can also use this as a movement ability if you're just trying to do like speed dungeons where you're not really going to have any issues with CC or anything like that. Then damaging enemies shadow step also increases your critical strike chance against them by 8%. So using shadow step on enemies is pretty useful, even like as an offensive tool, I think. But primarily you want to kind of hold it for CC. Kind of use it accordingly, I guess. Then we got weapon mastery. So swords are going to deal 9% increased damage, and crossbows deal 15% increased critical strike damage. The main reason for this is just the swords bonus. I don't believe you get the crossbow bonus unless you're using like puncture, so it's not really that big of a deal, but the 9% increased damage with swords is pretty good. Then we're going to go dash. We don't really have a reason to go any of these in dash. They're not really particularly useful, so yeah, we just go 1 point to that. Then we go rapid gambits. Your evade cooldown is reduced when you daze an enemy. We daze enemies with twisting blades, so that's pretty good. And then we have concussive after knocking back or knocking down an enemy, which we knock things down with poison trap. You're going to get 12% increased critical strike chance against them. And then when you critically strike a dazed enemy, they're knocked down for 5 seconds, right? So you just have ways of procting things, like knocking them down, because if they're knocked down, that means they can't hit you, so it's also like a kind of a pseudo form of damage reduction, right? Yeah, so then we're going to go poison trap. We're only putting 1 rank into this because the main reason we use poison trap is to knock things down and to help proc our exposure, so reduce the active cooldowns of your trap skills by 20%. So this is going to help keep your death trap off of cooldown. Then we have exploit. You deal 18% increased damage to healthy and injured enemies. And then we have malice. You deal 9% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Then we have deadly venom, debilitating toxins. So this is going to make it to where when things are poisoned, they're going to deal 15% less damage than you, and we're going to be poisoning things with poison traps, so that's pretty alright. Then we have alchemical advantage. You gain 1% increased attack speed for each enemy you have poisoned, up to 15%, so that's pretty sweet. And then moving right along down here, we're going to go innervation. This is going to give us energy back, or give us a lucky hit chance to get energy back. Then we have second wind. So every 100 energy we spend is going to increase our lucky hit chance by 15%. So it's going to make our lucky hits go off more often by increasing the chance of them to happen. And then trap mastery. When poison trap or death trap activates, you gain 12% increased critical strike chance against vulnerable and crowd controlled enemies for 4 seconds. So that is pretty solid. Then we have death trap. Prime death trap, so this is going to make it to where enemies are pulled into the death trap when it activates. And then we have supreme death trap. If death trap kills an enemy, its cooldown is reduced by 12 seconds. We have aftermath. Using an ultimate skill, restore 60 energy. Adrenaline rush. While moving, you gain 5% increased energy regeneration. And then haste while at or above 15% maximum energy, you're going to get more move speed. While below 50% maximum energy, you get more attack speed. And then the exposure is going to be the keystone. So dealing a direct damage by a trap skill, it has a chance to reduce the active cooldowns of your trap or drop a cluster of exploding stun grenades that deal 2,000 total physical damage and stun enemies for 0.5 seconds. So this does give us a little bit of access to stun. Not as much as I would like, but yeah, it does give you some nice stagger and stuff for bosses though too. Alright, well, when it comes to Paragon, because I'm not too far through the Paragon tree yet, I'll just let you guys look at that in the link in the description. But the main things with Paragon, I would say, is if you are playing this build, the first 3 ones you want to go for are going to be Closer, then Diminish, and then I would say Combat, right? So the critical strike damage one, and you might actually do Exploit before Diminish if you're leveling up, because that'll give you more access to Vulnerable, but at the same time, you just have so much access to Vulnerable already, it's not like super important that you pick up Exploit super early, in my opinion. I think you might actually end up getting more damage by picking up these early additive bonuses, because since you don't have a ton of additive damage stacked yet, and on top of that you can get a bunch of critical strike damage here, I think that might actually outperform it a little bit until later on, when obviously you will need to pick it up later just to get the extra vulnerable damage and stuff like that. Yeah, so, but yeah, that's really all I had to say about that, and yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Like, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.